A Girl Scout walks into the Lutz Cemetery to visit her favorite author's monument because she's currently reading one of his famous novels called The Grand Budapest Hotel. The author has become a national treasure by now, so people hang their keychains and sentimental objects on his monument for a reason we will find out later. Scenes rewind all the way back to 1986, in which we see the beloved author in his older years. He talks about people mistaking writers for creative individuals, whereas according to him, the people who inspire writers to come up with new stories are the actual heroes. He starts telling a story that he heard from someone else, but since he was the one who wrote it down, he got famous for it. The movie recap now enters a flashback to 1968, a time when the author was young and he was suffering from scribe's fever. It led to him spending his August at the Grand Budapest Hotel in the spa town of Nebelspad. The hotel was built on top of a tall mountain, which was covered with lush and fragrant alpine trees. The author narrates that the hotel was once widely celebrated, but by the time he was able to book a room, the place had gone out of fashion and it was heading towards its untimely demise. Over the course of his stay, he starts recognizing people by their faces, given that there are only a few guests at the hotel. Despite nodding and making eye contact, the guests fail to get acquainted with one another due to their vastly different personalities. Out of sheer boredom one day, he walks up to Mr. Jean, who is the hotel's concierge, and they start talking about the owner, Mr. Zero Mustafa. The owner seems awfully lonely as he sits quietly in the lobby, staring into a void. Jean gossips about Zero owning multiple hotels but having a sentimental attachment to the Grand Budapest, which is why he visits thrice a year and lives in the servants' quarters. The author returns to his room and finds himself at the edge of his seat. Now brimming with excitement and curiosity, he wants to know more about the old owner. Fate intervenes the next day when Zero spots the author in the hot tubs and admires his writing style. Inviting the author for a dinner date, Zero offers to share the story of how he became the Grand Budapest Hotel's owner. Since the author has no company, he agrees to join Zero without any hesitation. After sipping the hotel's most delectable wine, Zero starts his story from the very beginning. We see a flashback within a flashback of the Grand Budapest from 1932, as it is being managed completely by the hotel's then concierge, Monsieur Gustave, since the owner at that time liked to keep his identity hidden. Gustave is an elegant man of vast vocabulary who also happens to be a perfectionist. He commits to the hotel full-time and puts all of his effort into supervising the staff like an army. He dines with one of the hotel's guests, who is a wealthy lady named Madame D. She claims to have predicted her own death, which has put her in a worrisome state. Gustave convinces her to get a proper diagnosis from the hospital, even though she's not willing to do so. He shows her to her car and bids her farewell. Before speeding away, she hands Gustave a coin, who then hands it over to a bellboy and gives him an elaborate set of instructions on how to spend it. He pauses briefly and asks the bellboy to introduce himself first. That's when he introduces himself as Zero, the hotel's new lobby boy. When the boy fails to answer some complicated questions, Gustave simply asks the boy what motivated him to start working at the hotel. He excitedly claims that this is the kind of iconic hotel he wishes to work in, so he can fulfill his dreams. Gustave admires his gusto and makes the boy his apprentice. Zero from the current timeline narrates what it was like being a bellboy. He felt like a ghost who could observe anything he wanted without being noticed. Once he became familiar with the hotel, he found out that Gustave was offering physical pleasures to the rich and elderly in order to secure donations. After revealing Gustave's countless affairs, Zero also mentions that he used to work almost 7 days a week. In the flashback, he wakes up early and draws a fake mustache to appear older. He also talks about Gustave's nightly sermons for the workers, which positively invigorated them and helped them work with more honesty and enthusiasm. Another character is introduced as Deputy Kovacs, who is an accountant and a lawyer. He visits the Grand Budapest once a month to check the books and communicate any messages on behalf of the proprietor. Gustave and the hotel's business manager named Becker meet him in a chamber above the reception for the sake of their privacy. Zero steers off the story to introduce his lover at the time, named Agatha. She had an abnormally large birthmark on her cheek, and she worked at a small bakery called Mendel's Patisserie. She baked everything by herself and made deliveries to the customers on her bicycle. One day, Zero brings the daily newspaper to the hotel's lobby and finds Madame D's obituary on the front page. He delivers the news of her passing to Gustave, who is busy pleasing one of his guests. He immediately tells Zero to pack up and leave for the train station with him to attend Madame D's funeral. On their way, their train is stopped by the police in a plain field. The constables check all the cabins, including Gustave's. They ask for his and Zero's documentation after realizing that Zero is an immigrant. He surely doesn't have a visa, so Gustave tries to cover for him by lying about his immigration papers at work. Instead of buying their fake story, the constables beat them up. Thankfully, Officer Henkel shows up and recognizes Gustave. He praises him for being a hard-working concierge, revealing that he once visited the Grand Budapest on vacation as a child and admired Gustave's amazing work spirit. He spares Zero because of this and assigns him a ticket, which allows him to travel without being bothered. They finally reach Madame D's lavish mansion during the dark hours. Upon arrival, they are attended by D's maid named Clotilde, who shows them to D's coffin. Strangely, no one is present at the funeral. Gustave briefly grieves her unfortunate passing and compliments the morticians for doing a remarkable job on her body. Clotilde shows them to the butler's pantry and serves them milk. They take a peek inside the kitchen and see a servant named Serge arriving from a narrow passageway. Gustave and Zero follow him inside and find all of Madame D's relatives congregated in a room to hear her last will and testament, hoping to get a bite out of her extraordinary wealth. Gustav and Zero find it odd that the attorney of D's estate is none other than their own accountant, Mr. Kovacs. He arrives with a box piled high with documents, since Madame D frequently changed her will. It is announced that her sisters and her only son Dmitri have inherited everything except for a rare painting, which D has left behind for her beloved Gustav. Dmitri takes offense to this and refuses to give Gustav anything. He approaches Gustav with a condescending tone and berates him with an onslaught of homophobic insults. In return, Gustav ends up punching his cartoon nose. While Zero also tries to defend Gustav, he ends up getting punched by Dmitri's thuggish bodyguard named Jopling. He is a highly trained, cold-blooded assassin of a man, and he wears gold rings on his knuckles. While Dmitri spirals out of control and continues to threaten Gustav, Jopling tries to hold him back. Gustav returns to the mansion and begins to climb a never-ending staircase just to see the painting. There, Zero suggests that they should simply steal the painting. Clotilde and Serge eventually catch them, but they end up helping them hide the painting and run away with it. On their way back, Gustav decides to sell the painting on the black market and have it liquidated before Dmitri and the cops get to them. He forms a solemn blood pact with Zero, according to which he must run away with Gustav and maintain a low profile. In return, he gets 1.5% of the painting's price. Zero, being an immature kid, demands 10%. Gustav obviously doesn't agree to this offer. Instead, he makes Zero his sole heir and swears to pass down every single belonging to him after his death. Zero shakes hands on it, even when Gustav tells him that he has nothing out of the ordinary to pass down to him, except for his poetry books. When the two return to the Grand Budapest, they hide the painting in a safe, which is in the chamber above the reception. They find out from another lobby boy that the cops are already here looking for Gustav. They quickly attend to the cops, where Henkel shows them the arrest warrant issued by Dmitri, who has accused Gustav of his mother's unaliving. Gustav becomes nervous due to the accusation and runs away. Henkels eventually catches him and locks him up in prison. Zero visits him after some time and brings him a pastry from Mendel's. Gustav's face is all sore and bruised up from his recent prison fights and other rebellious encounters, which he shares with Zero as fast as he can. When he asks Zero about his bail, we see a brief scene of Kovacs thoroughly explaining to Zero how Gustav had nothing to do with Dee's passing, since she was poisoned a day before he went to her mansion. He also sheds light on a notarized deposition from all of Dee's relatives, who have all described the suspect differently. There's only one witness, Serge, who has fled the jurisdiction and is now being pursued by relevant authorities. After learning all this from Zero, Gustav discusses that he also has his own alibi. On the day Dee was poisoned, he was sleeping with one of his female guests. However, he refuses to bring her into this, as it will expose their affair to the public and tarnish her marriage. On the other hand, Jopling tracks down Serge's sister and asks her about Serge's whereabouts. He leaves his card with her and asks her to send Serge back to Madame D's mansion. With Gustav locked up behind bars, Zero takes charge of his nightly sermons. He reads Gustav's letters, which he sent from prison every day. He reads the poetry in the letters, as if Gustav himself is preaching from the prison. In the prison, Gustav is spotted dragging a food trolley door to door and serving the prisoners some mush, which is supposed to be food. Once he's done with this duty, he returns to his cell, where he shares the pastry with his cellmates. In return, his mates come up with an elaborate escape plan. The story momentarily falls out of the flashback and goes back to the author and old Zero during their dinner. Zero sheds tears and shares that he has started to miss Agatha by bringing up this story. He gives up on his promise of not discussing Agatha. He reveals that a month prior to Gustav's arrest, he went on a movie date with Agatha and asked for her hand in marriage. She said yes in an instant and kissed him. The flashback now continues, in which Zero takes Agatha to the carousel and gives her a romantic poetry book as a gift. He even introduces Agatha and Gustav to one another, since they're his favorite people. To secretly pull Zero's strings, Gustav admires Agatha in a flirtatious way. His prank works, as Zero gets instantly provoked by this behavior. The story now gets back on track, and we see Zero and Agatha from a timeline in which Gustav is still serving prison time. Zero stuffs digging tools in Agatha's pastries and smuggles them to Gustav. The prison guards check all the pastries before handing them over to Gustav. While they cut open the basic ones, they don't touch the pretty ones which happen to have all the hidden tools. Meanwhile, Dmitri pays Kovacs a personal visit and accuses him of being on Gustav's side. Kovacs assures him that it's nothing more than business, but Dmitri leaves in doubt. Back in prison, Gustav and his cellmates dig a hole in the ground with the smuggled tools and pave their own escape tunnel. Later at night, in Agatha's room above the bakery, Zero tells her about the painting they stole. Before she judges him for it, he hands her a code, which needs a magnifying glass to read. It is the direction to the painting. He explains that if anything is to happen to him, she should take the painting. They nearly get caught by Mendel's owner, who keeps a close eye on Agatha. Luckily, there's a roof exit from where Zero escapes before the bakery owner can catch him. Meanwhile, Kovacs is running errands when he suspects that he's being followed by Dmitri's thug bodyguard Jopling. Kovacs randomly enters the town's museum and finds a door with a no entry sign. While he tries to exit, the nutjob Jopling shuts the door and cuts off 4 of Kovacs' fingers. Jopling unalives Kovacs in the shadows and collects his fingers afterwards. At night, Gustav and his cellmates finally make it out of their cell through the tunnel and linger in the hallways. They steal a ladder to get to the ground floor. A prisoner sees them during this and tries to wake up the guards, but his cellmate shuts him up as Gustav had once served him food. The boys continue their comical escape. They take down the metal bars from a window and lower a rope ladder. It takes them directly to the steam vent of the prison's laundry room. There, they open the final hatch to escape. They get surprised by the guards playing poker down there, so one of the prisoners jumps down the hatch and slays all the guards to clear their path to freedom. Their group finally comes out of prison from checkpoint 19, where Zero is already resting by the haystack, waiting for Gustav. All the mates bid Gustav farewell and flee in a van. Once they are alone, Gustav demands all the things that he asked Zero to bring for him, including his favorite perfume. Zero nervously tells him he forgot to pack. Gustav controls his emotions and apologizes to Zero for dragging him into trouble. Zero doesn't take offense at any of this and solidifies their bond by declaring him his brother. Gustav then catches up with Agatha and becomes moved by Zero when he describes his love affair in poetry. Suddenly, sirens start wailing as the police become aware of the prison break. Zero now joins Gustav in his escape attempt. As they run through snowy fields and tall bridges, Henkels and his team analyze Gustav's cell block. Henkels orders his men to search every shop and every hotel to look for Gustav and his cellmates. Near the cell, he spots Jopling standing in the shadows. He can't be present at the site of official military investigations, so Henkels asks for his purpose for visiting. Jopling remains silent on this matter, so Henkels interrogates him about Kovacs unaliving, revealing that he was found in a sarcophagus placed in the storage room of their museum with 4 fingers missing. Jopling keeps a straight face and denies all of the allegations. He finds a torn pastry box on the floor, and upon tasting the cream, he figures out that it is from Mendel's. He now knows where to look for Gustav. Back on the run, Gustav and Zero come across a public phone booth. Gustav asks the operator to connect him to a certain line and makes Zero swear that he's never to speak of the help he's about to get. When he's connected with another Grand Hotel's receptionist, named Monsieur Ivan, it is revealed that all the receptionists have formed a super-secret agency called the Society of the Crossed Keys. Their aim is to help each other in tough times. Their symbolism of keys is the main reason why everyone hangs their keys on the author's monument in the present. Back in the storyline, Gustav shares his problem with Ivan, so he calls all the receptionists to make them aware of Gustav's situation. They all chip in some money and arrange a car for Gustav. Ivan comes to pick up Gustav and Zero, and he also gives him the perfume that he specifically asked for. Gustav doesn't feel courteous, so he takes Zero's money and gives it to Ivan as a token of appreciation. He drops them at the train station and vanishes. Meanwhile, Dmitri calls Jopling and orders him to visit Serge's sister with a more persuasive tone this time. Jopling himself is currently looking at Agatha's picture. Dmitri cuts the call and gets back to rummaging through the amendments in Dee's will. There, he notes that the painting he was being possessive about is already missing. He starts lashing out at Dee's sisters and tears apart the replacement painting. Clotilde rats out Gustav to save the sisters from Dmitri's wrath. He takes this personally and plans to go after him. On the other hand, Gustav and Zero talk about random things on the train. Gustav offers to officiate Zero's wedding ceremony and gives his blessings for Agatha, since he has grown fond of her. Agatha herself is shown packing up and planning on leaving her job due to her bothersome and invasive boss. She senses someone steps on the rooftop, but when she looks from the exit window, she sees no one. The scene now transitions to Henkels, as he is stunned by the recent news of finding a woman's unalived head in a basket. He gets his men to bring in a basket. When Henkels takes out the head, it turns out to be Serge's sister. We all know it is the work of the cold-hearted Jopling, who is seen stealing a bike from an innocent civilian at the gas station and speeding away on it. During their train ride, Zero narrates that he has already written a letter to Agatha, giving her directions to their hideout spot at the Gypsy Caravan so they can get married at this location. However, before they can reach the caravan, they have to take a detour in order to finally meet Serge. They quietly disembark in the freight yard outside the train station because Henkels is waiting outside the train's entrance. The two head to an observatory on top of a summit, where they admire the peaceful atmosphere. A monk follows them behind and instructs them to get on the next cable car after confirming Gustav's identity, which is totally based on the position he holds at the Grand Budapest. The cable car stops at a pivot point, where another cable car stops next to theirs. Another monk pops up and confirms Gustav's identity, after which he makes him switch cable cars. The monk's cable car takes them to the caravan. On its entrance, a monk confirms their identity and gives them off-white hooded robes to blend in with the others. They put on the robes and join the other monks who are singing in the chapel. The monk next to them directs them to the confessional. They find Serge on the other end of it. He starts apologizing for getting them involved and unintentionally framing them for Madame D's unaliving. Gustav begs him to come forward and clear his name, but Serge is afraid to do so because of what he had discovered earlier. He reveals that Madame D had left an entirely different will, which was only to be applicable if she gets unalived. Her family destroyed that will, but he pulled a second copy of it while simultaneously witnessing who poisoned D. Suddenly, he stops replying, which prompts the otherwise sophisticated Gustav to have a complete meltdown and cuss at him in a sudden shift of character. When they get to his side of the confessional, they find him strangled and unalived. Gustav quickly looks around and spots Jopling disguised as a monk. He also spots Gustav and runs away. He straps his feet on a ski and gets away on it. Zero spots a sledge with a Jesus statue nearby. He throws the statue and pursues Jopling on it along with Gustav. The pursuit turns into a comedic race, which Jopling ultimately wins while Gustav's sledge falls off the summit with him inside it. He manages to hang onto the edge, whereas Zero gets buried in the snow near the edge. Jopling walks to the edge to face Gustav, who confesses his hate for him. Jopling starts cracking the ice with his feet so Gustav can fall to his death. Luckily, Zero spawns from behind and pushes him instead. He quickly lifts Gustav back up, only to realize that Henkels and his men are on the other end of the summit, ordering Gustav to surrender since he's an escaped felon. Gustav refuses to surrender. Zero suggests stealing Joplin's motorbike and heading back to the Grand Budapest so they can get their painting back before they run off to a life of secrecy. Gustav stops to pay a brief tribute to Serge and his services by sparing a moment of silence. The two then ride Joplin's bike to head back to Nebel's 24 hours later, we witness that the Grand Budapest is being supervised by Monsieur Chuck in Gustav's absence. Gustav and Zero call in Agatha for help. She distracts the man at the hotel's front desk by offering free goods from her bakery. She makes it to the staff room, where Zero and Gustav hid the painting earlier. She gets the painting out of there while they stay behind in her minivan, disguised as bakery workers. She first checks if the coast is clear and then walks out of there with the painting wrapped in brown paper. Suddenly, Chuck welcomes Dmitri along with his family and Henkel's. He immediately gazes at Agatha because of the painting in her hand and goes after her. She takes the elevator, where he comes after her. Meanwhile, Gustav and Zero enter the Grand Budapest with fake pastry boxes. The staff members get stunned to see them at the hotel, but they don't expose their presence. Gustav and Zero take the new lobby boy near the service elevator and ask him about Agatha's whereabouts. He tells them her exact location without hesitation, which Zero takes for poor training. He stops everything just to teach him not to give out information about their guests under any circumstances. On the other hand, Dmitri sneakily tears the wrapper and confirms that Agatha holds his mother's painting. He goes after her in the hallways, where she starts running. He gets furious and runs after her on the 6th floor. She outruns him and vanishes. There, he spots Gustav and Zero coming out of the service elevator. He starts shooting at them, which leads the guests staying in the rooms on Gustav's side of the floor to shoot back at Dmitri. The guests on Dmitri's side of the floor also fire back. Henkel's and Chuck arrive on the scene and order a complete ceasefire. Gustav blows his cover in front of Henkel's and accuses him of Madame D's unaliving at the hands of Joplin, who also unalived other people related to the case. Suddenly, they hear Agatha's scream. Zero doesn't care about the shots being fired at him and simply runs to see her. He finds her barely hanging on to a private room's balcony along with the painting. Zero runs in that room and jumps off the balcony to save her, but he ends up falling along with her. While the painting remains hooked, the two are miraculously saved by the Mendel's van parked under the balcony. There, Agatha points out the envelope that can be seen at the back of the painting's canvas. Once things settle, Henkel's opens the envelope in front of everyone and finds the second copy of the second will. It is presented in court, revealing that Madame D left everything for Gustav, as she was aware of Dmitri's attempts to unalive her. After this revelation, Gustav inherits her mansion, her high-grossing factories, and the Grand Budapest Hotel. This finally puts an end to the mystery of the hotel's hidden proprietor. It was none other than Madame D herself. Now, Zero becomes the new receptionist of the Grand Budapest. Gustav also keeps his promise and anoints him as his sole successor. He also officiates his wedding with Agatha. Sometime later, Zero takes a train ride with Gustav and Agatha and returns to the Lutz cemetery. Gustav finally admits that throughout his entire career, Zero is the only lobby boy who surpassed his expectations. Suddenly, the army stops their train for checking as a war is on the brink. This time, they don't accept the ticket provided by Henkel's earlier, and they forcefully try to take Zero away. Gustav fights them to save Zero, but this time, there's no Henkel's to save him. Hence, he passes away while trying to save Zero, who inherits his entire wealth. Scenes tap back to the author and Zero's dinner conversation, where dessert is finally served as the last course. After that, they go to grab their room keys, only to find that Monsieur Jean has vanished from his desk. Zero takes over his job and hands the author his key, who notes that the rare painting with all the fuss is hung at the reception. This helps him finally understand that Zero is a highly sentimental person with a pure heart, which is why he traded everything with the government just to keep this unprofitable hotel still running. After exchanging some words of wisdom, Zero heads to sleep in the servant quarters, while the author remains in the lobby. His mind is buzzing with inspiration as he continues to take notes about his new book the entire night. With this, the young Girl Scout at the cemetery finally finishes reading the story of the Grand Budapest Hotel, and the film comes to an end. To watch more awesome and thought-provoking movie recaps, please subscribe to Film Guy Recaps. Don't forget to like this video and tell us in the comments which movie you want to see next. Goodbye for now.